got a question.
Sure.
How long is this going to take?
It shouldn't take a whole lot longer.
Do you think I can get there before 129?
Probably not. What's at 129?
Well, I had a project to 160.
Okay.
This is the story of the wrongful conviction of Brendan Dassey. Over the course of Season 2, we explore the constitutional errors at the heart of this injustice, the chaos of Kaczynski, and the techniques responsible for determining Brendan's fate. The conversation continues. Welcome to the 6th Hour. For the past 5 years, I've spent hours, days at a time, buried under the weight of the wrongful conviction of a Mishicot High School special ed student who had gone to school on February the 27th, 2006, as an innocent 16-year-old kid, only to experience a macabre initiation into adulthood at the hands of local law enforcement when he left as a suspect in one of Wisconsin's most notorious criminal investigations. This profound miscarriage of justice is Brendan's story.
There's something going on, your freedom is in danger. Agents of the state can take your children from the manger. Or they will sacrifice your kid. Take Brendan Dassey, that's exactly what they did. They needed someone on how Jody wouldn't flip. They looked around, saw him quick. Oh, it made so much sense why all Brendan Dassey was Steven's alibi. There's something going on in Wisconsin that's not kosher. We better stop, let's all take a look closer. Oh, they will sacrifice.
When you watched Making a Murderer, what issue resonated with you? Where did your outrage land? How did you feel as you sat next to Wiegert and Fassbender in the interrogation room, watching on as they manipulated, duped and coerced 16-year-old Brendan Dassey? Did you sit with the press gallery and watch the theft of Brendan and his Uncle Steven's presumption of innocence, while Ken Kratz relayed the state's narrative without falter, or corroboration? What happened next for you? Did you walk past? Or did you stop? Were you called to act, to advocate, to just do something? Because doing nothing felt like a crime. For millions of people, Making a Murderer was a catalyst for change. Change in interrogation tactics. Change in lives. States are now citing the mistreatment of Brendan Dassey and his false confession as supportive evidence and passing bills banning the use of deception when interviewing juveniles. Apathetically or pathetically, either will do, Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin continues to do nothing. And he's really good at doing nothing for Brendan Dassey. But the vigilant support of ordinary people, and by ordinary I mean incredible, doing extraordinary things continues to build momentum, and people continue to say Brendan Dassey's name. So was it Reddit, a Facebook group, or did you deep dive into the case files and transcripts? Was it an impassioned YouTuber from California who helped inform you on the issues? Because when we're informed, our collective cry for justice becomes even more powerful. Director Joe Berlinger, who chronicled the West Memphis 3 injustice in his 3-part docuseries Paradise Lost, talked to the power of the grassroots movement that swept West Memphis, Arkansas, including those who had once stood outside the courts as Jason Baldwin, Damien Eccles, and Jesse Miscali were wrongfully convicted. But these same people would later become vocal advocates in the fight for their release. You see, we're a microcosmic representation of every society, an alliance fueled by people with a shared aversion to injustice and abuse of power. And if we look at the history of wrongful convictions in America, very few people prove their innocence or get released inside the system. It is people outside the criminal justice and legal system who pry it loose through their sustained pressure and efforts and all the initiatives they do to bring attention to a case. We must be those people. We must be vigilant in our efforts to seek justice for Brendan. We must demand more of a system that maintains its fiscal and ideological positions by the apathy of the courts, judges, and the laws that bind them. As Dr. Richard Leo said, everyone needs to remember this is as big an injustice as it was 5 years ago, as it was 10 years ago, as it was 15 years ago. Even more in the sense that Brendan has served more time, and every day he serves in prison is a day he should not be serving in prison. Joining me for this episode of The Sixth Hour is Stacey Seabrook, Paul Capaldi, and Mark Hoddinott. An awesome representation of the advocates who pound the keyboards, who virtually thumb the case files, and who have been motivated to act in the most incredible ways. We dive into what being an advocate means in the context of the wrongful conviction of Brendan Dassey and his uncle Steven, and discuss the community that was born 5.5 years ago. That is a heaving, breathing collective campaigning for justice, freedom, and accountability. The conversation continues. Brendan's trajectory to freedom continues to arc. It's an injustice that illustrates the urgent need for reform in the interrogation room of juveniles across the United States. Sadly, a false confession remains one of the most prejudicial sources of false evidence resulting in wrongful convictions throughout the US. But I, like millions of others, didn't know that 5.5 years ago. In the December of 2015, Netflix could not have foreseen the lasting impact that Making a Murderer would have, nor the visceral response it would elicit in millions of people. 19 million people, in fact, in the first 2 weeks alone, watched the 10-part docuseries, globally. In the December, small-town Manitowoc was home to a mere 33,300 people. But within days, that number would virtually swell as millions of viewers and ready-made social and criminal justice reform activists consuming the docuseries would invite themselves to the Avery salvage yard, become outraged at the egregious injustice unfolding at Manitowoc and Calumet County courthouses, and feel utter despair as they watch the 16-year-old, highly suggestible and speech and language impaired Brendan Dassey grapple with the gravity of the situation he found himself in at Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department on March the 1st, 2006. But fueled by the injustice playing out before them, a community was born. A community that continues to thrive 5+ years on in that elusive search for justice, with a new wave of advocates ebbing into the flow every few months. Among the most prolific is Paul Capaldi, a relentless conversationalist who releases videos on the case almost every single day. Stacey Seabrook, who weaves the story of this injustice through his body of songs, and Mark Hoddinott, who seeks justice through philanthropy, interviewing, and informed commentary. They join me today to discuss advocacy in the context of a wrongful conviction, or in this case, two. Welcome to the 6th Hour. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How did you all come to find yourself in 2021 discussing advocacy on a podcast about Brendan Dassey? Paul, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, that's a good question. It was my daughter that first asked me in February 2016. She said, "Dad, have you ever heard of a place called Manitowoc?" And so, 5.5 years later, sometimes I wonder, maybe if she hadn't have asked me that question, life would be a lot simpler. But like so many of us watched the documentary, was forced to watch the documentary. In fact, before we even watched the documentary, Emily said, "Well, it's about this guy, Steven Avery, that was wrongfully convicted. He did 18 years of a 32-year sentence, only to be exonerated through DNA." And I thought, this DNA stuff, this can sometimes be problematic because it can be too heavily relied upon. But then she said, but then his nephew confessed, and I said, "Well, there's your problem, And she said to me, "Well, would police plant evidence?" And I said, "Well, I don't really think so because the risks are just too great." So then, when she came back from Glasgow and insisted that we watch Making a Murderer, I couldn't believe what I was watching. And I remember the thing that really upset me was the fact that the sheriff's department were clearly so corrupt that despite this huge conflict of interest, they're finding all this evidence, all this bogus evidence. And I thought, this is a real shame because this is so embarrassing to police, not just in Wisconsin, but anywhere. And I've got a lot of friends in the police, and I know some really good people within the police force. And that's what really annoyed me. So I actually ended up phoning the sheriff of Manitowoc, Robert Herman, and we had quite a few lengthy chats about the case. And, he did his little bit to try and tell me that, I had been deluded by this documentary. But everything that he told me just reconfirmed what I suspected. So, 5.5 years later, I was very deeply concerned by the law enforcement side of it.
Yeah.
That is not how it's supposed to be. As I say, that's what fired me up. And along the way, you meet some really great advocates, don't you? Some incredibly inspiring people, such as the dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Stacey, how did you find yourself here?
How did I found myself here? By watching the documentary right a week after it came out. I saw the thumbnail and I didn't really like it. And then I, with a friend, watched it, and I just made the mistake. Maybe I stepped on a surfboard. It seemed like after watching the documentary, I just thought, well, these guys can't be in jail still, and so I Googled that, and that was a step onto a board, and the wave just sort of carried me through the last 5.5 years, because I really immersed myself in the research, and it was just all encompassing that first 6 months. There just seemed to be so much, these groups just manifested, and we crowdsourced the material, and after that, and I was going through my own life experience, so I had a lot of time alone at that particular time, and so I immersed myself in this information beyond the documentary. And the more I researched, the more I just saw that this injustice is massive. And then I just wrote a few songs, and I wrote a few more and more and more. And here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's interesting you touched on there that for me, when I first watched the documentary, I almost had this sense of, I hope this is like some sort of social experiment that Netflix are doing. But sadly, it wasn't. Mark?
Yes.
Yes. So how do you find yourself talking to me in 2021?
Well, not all that different from Paul in April 2017, when I was in Europe, returning to Australia, and my daughter was in London. I was transiting London, and she brought to my attention this documentary because she knew I was interested in social justice issues. To be honest, I was a little surprised I wasn't more familiar with it until she told me, because by that point it had been about 18 months since it had been released. And I sat down in her apartment and watched 2 episodes with her. Then they went to bed. I kept it going for another episode or 2 into the night. And the next morning I was on a plane, or actually next evening I was on a plane back to Australia. And by that point I had joined Netflix, downloaded all the episodes, and as soon as I sat on that plane at Heathrow, I was watching the rest of it right to the end. Yeah. But the thing I think that really hooked me in was the reality of the potential for humans to be so evil to do what they did. And I could easily imagine anyone that I knew, including myself, being caught up in such a story when people have willful intent to do harm.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. I couldn't just then watch it as a piece of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't do that. And that's got me interested in to follow what was already well-established Facebook groups and other advocacy media. And from there, a lot has happened, which I'm sure we'll talk about in due course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's perfect into my next question for you all, which is, what issue was most salient for you? So where did your outrage land? Once you'd watched Making a Murderer, where did the outrage land for you? Stacey, if you want to take that.
Sure. For me, it was I have a tendency I dislike it or I have aversion when people ask me to believe an unreal story. And so that's where it really, I always say my heart really is, I'm empathetic towards Steven and Brendan and stuff, but my real fire came from what I saw as just a blatant, and the more you research it, this is the thing, people go, oh, you were manipulated by a documentary. Well, not really, because I didn't stop just after 10 episodes. I went into the research, and as you start reading the files and the Castle report and trial transcripts, and you just realize, and I thought, I just couldn't let it sit. It wouldn't sit in me, because it's like that thing. It's once you know the truth, it doesn't settle until something's rectified. And in this case, that's really what's fired me the whole time. It's this injustice, this abuse of power, this actual, this hubris of that particular law enforcement agency to think that they can pull this off. And everyone, they're relying on people's apathy. And that's what really, it's still, I kind of had to take a break from the case in year 3. And it ebbs and flows now, but I watch myself because it's still there, that sort of fire in me to expose the corruption.
Yeah. And Mark and Paul?
For me, the salient points, well, probably a couple, if I may. First, what I watched going on there, and I'm like Stacey and Paul, filter the stuff that we know is part of storytelling as opposed to the totality of the case. That's not to take anything away from the documentary, but they're trying to condense a long period of time into 10 hours of viewing. But the interviews with Brendan were the ones that really, really hurt inside. To see how a vulnerable young man who was just being a nice boy trying to be compliant, and they had the law enforcement officers in particular, Wiegert and Fassbender, were, in my view at least, behaving in an evil way, and they were totally okay with that. That was one of the most important salient points. The second is the impact that this had and the totality of the story, because this story goes way back to 1985, and the impact that was having on Steven's mother and father, Dolores and Alan Avery, and Barbara's Brendan's mother and father, the impact it was having on them as parents. I really felt their pain, and to this day feel their pain, to observe people doing stuff that is just so wrong. And And they were just everyday working class family trying to live from week to week, making a world that made sense for them. And to see people thinking that they could do this and it was okay to that family, that's really what struck me.
Well, funnily enough, I've just written this down. I can remember at the time of watching Making a Murder, as I say, it was my annoyance was totally against the sheriff's department. And I remember at the time, I didn't really have much sympathy for Brendan Dassey because I thought, well, you've said all this stupid stuff. You've gone along with what the detectives were telling you, and having been a youngster myself and having had one or two scrapes, I thought, why are you saying all this stuff? Why are you just why are you giving in to them, And I really didn't get that. So I didn't really have much sympathy for Brendan. It was probably about a year later, certainly chatting with Carla Chase, who is obviously Steve's niece, Chuck's daughter. That sort of changed me a bit. And also Eric Ozey, when you actually dig deeper, because this stupid statement by Fallon that, innocent people don't confess, you think that should be the case, but it's not. I didn't quite have the sympathy that a lot of people, I know, for example, you, Tracy, that was the thing that really got to you, was how they treated Brendan. And I was a little bit sort of, well, you've landed yourself where you've landed yourself. Why just go along with them? And I didn't really get that. So it's been quite a journey to discover how Wiegand and Fassbender and the state in general, how did they get Brendan, to discover that, the former disgraced prosecutor is emailing Tom Fallon, suggesting that, just before the first Seventh Circuit arguments, that they should be looking at Brendan's sentence now. It's almost as if he had taken the plea deal, therefore.
I think it's interesting that you have that take, on first watching, because for many people, the visceral response was contained in that interrogation room with Brendan. It is interesting that you came to it from that. And I suppose that speaks to a lot of people who still refuse to believe in Brendan's innocence, that they have landed where you first started from and they haven't moved on, So it is that information collection that helps inform how we make our opinions. And I put to you all, how did you collect the evidence that you needed to support your opinion, particularly as continuously since late 2015, there's been a deluge of information and misinformation being shared?
Tracy, this is Mark. So I will just give you mine, if I may. To me, it starts off it's like climbing a ladder. So I've formed my opinion by first listening to others to start with, so I could kind of create a contextual environment for what would ultimately be my own informed opinion. And that included going onto the Reddit pages and Twitter and Facebook pages to understand the factual side. I'm a fairly analytical thinker and I need to understand how things work to come to an opinion. So I started doing that, and then I started participating with other known advocates, including Paul and Richard McAdam and Stacey. And from there, I fairly early on started to do some YouTube videoing work myself. I was asked to do it, but it was a bit cathartic for me because it was a way of expressing my emotion through having a say. And that then led to attending rallies. My first rally I went to was in 2018. And when I went to that rally, there was a very functional purpose for going to that rally, and to come all the way from Australia to that rally was a big deal for me. I met specific people that were relevant to this matter, the Avery family and Barbara and Brendan's and all that side of the family, Pete Dassey, and a lot of other really interesting and known supporters such as Sandra Greenman. And from there, within 2 months of being in Wisconsin, which was the first time I've ever been there, I was back a second time on my own, because I needed to piece together the physical surrounds. I wanted to have a much better understanding of the environment that was Wisconsin. And that then started to dominate the way I was putting together my knowledge because I wanted my knowledge to be based on a good understanding of not just, if you like, the factual aspects, which we could get from case records and so on, but also the environmental aspects, both physical and human, that then created a world in my head that made sense when I was talking about facts in the case. And just one final little thing to give you an example of how valuable that was is just to understand how people speak there. People will say, like in any different environment, even though it's English-speaking nation, within nations, people have ways of speaking. And to understand when someone makes a statement that this is what they mean by that statement, because if you don't understand that, you could interpret it differently. It's just a selection of words and an imputation from a word that was what the intent was. So going to Wisconsin, going and speaking with the Avery family, and ultimately for me speaking with Steven, gave me a much, much better understanding of the reality on the ground of what this case was. And therefore I started to build my knowledge based on that sort of continuum. And that's where we are today.
That's some journey, Mark. Stacey, Paul, yourselves.
I started just researching, that was me. And with all that, what was it, crowdsourced information, that's where it took me. And so I have a bit of a different angle on things. It's, the more I learned, I would sort of cross-reference it with footage and documents, news programs and stuff. And so everything just screamed to me just to keep learning more. And so, I would take things like, you learn something, say when the phone calls were released for the dispatch, and then I would circle back and then I look at how Kratz is giving his press conference. And now, rather than just seeing that press conference, which raised flags right off the bat, but when you can cross-reference it from stuff that you've learned and that certain phone calls exist, it just, once again, always points back to, why are they doing this then? Because you can almost, there's numerous points where you can go, the law enforcement are misinforming, lying if you want, and so those are the things that I got all my information from research, to be honest. And then obviously once at the beginning, the first year, there wasn't YouTube channels, there was Reddit. I went to Reddit a lot, and that was the main source for me. But then once I hooked on to a few people, and then Eric Jose really became this sort of force in the community. And then I hooked up with him. He reached out one time, and we started talking. He heard some music that I produced and about the case, and then the wave took over, and we've all met each other. And so that's where I've served. But mainly, there's a lot of, they're not talked about, superstars in research, and a lot of them put their material up on Reddit and other forums, Twitter, Facebook groups for free. And these people are just amazing at spreadsheets, writing documents that are easily readable, and just the sheer amount of time that a collective group of people, we don't know all of them, but that's where it all came from for me.
Brilliant.
I can just take you back to a comment that Mark made about the fact that he went back to Manitowoc a couple of months after the rally. That's interesting, that, because Kathleen Zellner is without doubt Wisconsin DOJ's biggest pain in the neck. But Mark is definitely number 2 on that list, isn't he? It's definitely.
Thank you, Paul. I'll wear that. I'll wear that badge if it's true.
You're very welcome. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was the fact that I reached out to Sheriff Herman was interesting, because he was pleasant to chat to, because I'd sent him some respectful emails, and he was happy to take my call, and we chatted quite a bit about all sorts of things, including the fact that he found out that I played the accordion, and he told me that his mum plays the accordion, and but he talked about the fact that there were Facebook groups. I didn't know there was any Facebook groups, so it was thanks to him that I actually joined the various Facebook groups. And again, Mark won't mention this, but he's actually the one of the main moderators in the Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey discussion group. It was through the Facebook groups that I certainly came across the dude Eric Jose, And I'm trying to think how I first came across Stacey's music. I can't remember. It must have been just typing stuff in on YouTube, looking for stuff. That's all you can do, when you're in Galashiels in the Scottish borders. I'm 3,600 miles away from Manifox. I realise obviously yourself and Mark are a lot further. And for Stacey, I think you're several hundred miles away.
I don't know. Yeah, long. Can't walk there, that's for sure, or take a while.
No. So that's what you do. You just go on the internet and find out stuff that you can. For me, the YouTube channels were always the ones that I sort of looked at. Initially, there were the main three, I would say, were Casey Martinez, Laura Keck. But obviously the dude was the one that a lot of us sort of went to. I suppose, in fairness, yes, he didn't use a lot of profanity. He's one of his main sayings, one of his great sayings was keep it classy for Brendan Dassey, which is something that you want to sort of look at when you're doing this sort of advocacy stuff. If you come across, I realize that sometimes, yes, you can't help but want to swear at the situation, but it really doesn't help, does it? If you have the occasional profanity, that's going to be far more effective than just going out on a rant. And I think initially that was the reason why that Herman took my phone call, and because my emails weren't cursing and swearing, and certainly when we chatted, it was all very polite. You just keep going. You just keep looking at different things. I mean, bizarrely, of course, certain theories to do with the case have come and gone, haven't they? The idea that the blood in the RAV4 was planted from the blood vial, that seems to be not to be the case. That doesn't immediately equate to, oh, well, Steven Avery must be guilty. No, it just means that there was another source of blood, and sure enough, he'd cut his hand, he'd reopened the cut. There's blood in the sink one evening, and it's gone the next.
I think it's human nature that people will grab onto an idea, theory, and run with it, and perhaps those theories evolve over time because we're 5+ years on, and so much more information has come out, through Kathleen Zellner's investigations, as Stacey touched on, through, the incredible researchers that work this case. So, as I touched on at the opening, you're all advocates, social and creative activists even, and you engage and you inform others in the push for justice and for transformation of the systems that have enabled the wrongful conviction of Brendan and his uncle Steven. I'd love to expand on that for a little while. So, Paul, I'll begin with yourself. If you can tell listeners about your YouTube channel and perhaps elaborate for us on your specific and personal objectives by using this platform in the way that you do.
As I say, having had all these conversations with Sheriff Herman, I was able to then inform other people of things that he had said. And you end up putting something on, say, Facebook, you put an item in there. It tends to, because there's so many people there posting stuff, it very quickly, gets forgotten about. So I wanted something that would be there for years to come. So what I did was I decided I would, just do a couple of pages of notes about my conversations with Sheriff Herman and put them in the form of a video. But I certainly didn't want, and I said this to the dude at the time, I don't want to stand on your toes, and I'm only going to do the one video because you're the main guy here. But he was like, oh no, you should do more. So I kept doing more and more videos. But one of the things I like to try and do is a bit like yourself, try and get people on to come and chat with me about the case. Try and get it to be a little bit like as if you're meeting somebody in a bar, and it's just a nice conversation, where people are given their background as well. So yeah, what I tend to do is sometimes I'll go through specific subjects, if you like, topics, for example, at the moment I'm looking at a really good article for the Oklahoma Law Review written by Michael Cicchini, who you've interviewed a couple of times, haven't you,
I have.
Tracy? So going through an article, which can be quite daunting because that there is to a certain extent quite a lot of this sort of legalese, if that's the right term, There's a lot of terminology which can be a bit intimidating at times, but then at other times, just having chats with people, like, for example, really looking forward to tomorrow evening, I'll have a chat with Pete Dassey, and I've been doing that since the middle of November, and he looks forward to having a chat with me. And also, he asks me every week, oh, who have you got coming on as guest this week? Who's coming on? And it's, it's just that great sort of having everybody together. It's, a lot of it's to do with, obviously, Brendan and the case in general, but there's other stuff that we do just for the fun of it. So yeah, the YouTube channel, it's a bit sort of varied, but I find that probably a bit like yourselves, I tend to like to put questions and then just let other people do the talking, if you can believe that, because I am known as a behaviour, but that's
yeah. I think what's really important about your YouTube channel, Paul, is the connections that you make with it. If you go to the chat, for example, there are people discussing the case, discussing what you're talking about. I think it's a vital source of keeping the momentum going for supporters, because we saw with the Keep Walking Till They're Talking is that there's a ferocious appetite for information about the case. And I think, your YouTube channel serves it very well. Stacey, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but you've released a catalogue of around 45 songs. You weave lyrics of fact with rhythmic storytelling, and perhaps there's a nod to Dylan in some of the guitar work. What compelled you to reach people in this way? Like, you have an incredible knowledge of the case. That's very evident. So which came first, the music or the research?
I was late to music, so I didn't play anything till I was 23. My ex-girlfriend taught me 3 chords, and so I started, but I was always a writer, and I always, I loved Dylan, and I loved his wordsmith ability and his cryptic lyrics and all that. And so when this case came through and I was so immersed into the details of it, that's just what came out. I'm actually really, I don't like calling myself an artist, or I just say I'm creative. I'm an antenna for this creative sort of thing in my life. It comes and goes and it pushes me around, to be honest. And so when I was charged with this injustice, I saw it was a way to process some of my frustration. I never had an idea of putting a song out. I would sit there researching, and I'd have my guitar and I'd write these tunes. And then it was it was a year to the day, roughly, or within the week of making a murder. And I had wrote this song called TikTok Manitowoc, and I just put it out there on Reddit, just as a sort of like, hey. And, one of the things I think is really important is that, and it's really, my eyes have been opened through this case, is that we spark each other. And so some guy, I remember Daniel Luke, this guy right at the beginning, and he went to Manitowoc and he was videotaping Ken Kratz and taking DNA swabs of his car. And I thought, that's amazing. And so this case really charged, it resonated with people somehow. Why, and I think it's because it's a blatant display of abuse of power and corruption. But so I realized that those people sparked me in a way to get a bit more active or do something. And even if it was small, and so that's what I think has really grown in me is realizing that my voice does matter, even if it's a single voice. And to be honest, with the songs and stuff, I think, I thought more so at the beginning that the corruption was so blatant and so ingrained in this case that I didn't think those two were ever going to get out. And so I thought, what could I do? And I thought art is it's a way to capture people emotionally. It's a way to grab them emotionally so they pay attention for a second. And so I thought songs last a long time, because you have Dylan's Hurricane Carter and that whole thing. And I thought, well, if these guys stay in prison for the rest of their lives and these buggers get away with it, well, I'll just do that. I'll write a song, and maybe, in 20 years, it'll still be this song. No one can take my song. And so that was the sort of impetus behind my creative work. But then I just started, as I said in other interviews, there's just so much material, unfortunately, and so the more I learned, the more, it just, and so, yeah, I just got taken away, to be honest.
Mark, I would be sure that you've been a driving force behind many initiatives, many high-profile initiatives, and supporting many people in their endeavours to help educate the public. You yourself recently interviewed Jerry Booting, and having collaborated with you on the Billboard campaign late last year across Wisconsin, I know firsthand your logistical prowess and your willingness to take action. What have you been involved in? What have you driven that you feel has had the biggest result so far?
Wow, that's a big question. What I would like to say at the beginning to set the scene is that I've been inspired by the diversity and power of all the voices out there in this thing. Paul and all his work, and Stacey and his just amazing music and lyric, but all the less known people behind the scenes. That framework of intent from good people is really what's inspired me. But to get specifically to your question, there's a few other things surrounding that. So when I first went to Manitowoc in 2018 to the rally, I met for the first time the wonderful lady, Sandra Greenman, and we talked for a fair while. And out of that came, not then, but subsequently, a discussion with her about Steven, who we all know Sandra's very close to Steven. And I asked her, just for contextual frameworks, does Steven have anyone on his visitors list that is not family, but is a man? In other words, did he have a mate or a buddy? And she said, no, he didn't. Most of the people on his visitors list were family, which are obviously friends and supportive, and female. Because why I thought about that issue was because, sometimes you need, as a man, you need another man's view and a friend that you can rely on that's not unduly influenced by history of family politics and what have you. Anyway, without getting too detailed in that led to me ultimately being on Steven's visitors list, because there's a limited number of people who can be on that at any one time. And that then placed an enjoyable but heavy burden that I'd take advantage for Steven's sake of being on that list, which meant I had to go to Wisconsin regularly to, in my mind at least, to justify taking one of those positions. And that subsequently ended up being that I think I've been back to Manitowoc in those years. Now I've been back about 8 times, I think, 8 or 9 times. I've visited Steven in Warpond Correctional Centre about 35 times. So that created a framework behind my enthusiasm and will to make a difference, because what I'm trying to do is to try to bring the humanity issues behind this. So my work with Steven and Sandra and supporting wherever I can other people to do what they're doing is part of, if you like, fueling and oiling the engine of change. And that ultimately ended up becoming close to the Avery family, and particularly Dolores and Alan, and visiting Alan on numerous occasions up in Crivets, because that's his sort of place he goes on weekends for a bit of R&R, and being close to other people. And then things like that led to billboard campaigns. When the reward came out, I forget when that was now, it was about 18 months ago, I think. We needed a mechanism to let that reward be known. So I, with some other friends here in Australia, we put together a campaign and started hiring billboards to advertise or to publicise the reward, and liaise with Steven's lawyer about that. So at least the message was the right message, and that from his side, whatever I was proposing to do was okay. I didn't want to do anything that unintentionally was not correct to do. And so from that, as you know yourself, Tracy, we launched into billboard campaign associated with Brendan. So I've been around the block a few times in life. I don't usually give up very easily on anything if I feel right is on my side. And so my work involves trying to be a good human being, helping others that can hopefully get some value out of that assistance, and being myself inspired by all the amazing work that dozens and dozens and hundreds and thousands of people do every day, from even little micro things all the way to some of those deep researchers that Stacey referred to before that are sitting there in the background. So it's a lot of words to answer your question, but my role is to facilitate everyone, if I can, in inspiring them to keep on keeping on.
It's a generous role. It's a very generous role. Had any of you ever been involved in a wrongful conviction case to this level of commitment before?
Never, from me.
Nor for me, never. No.
No. I mean, I'd heard about the fact that over there in America, what I knew about America was that they have incredibly long sentences and sometimes ridiculous sentences, like 275 and a half years or something stupid like that. And I knew that sometimes for sometimes quite minor things, you could sue one another and be awarded millions of damages. And, I just put it down as being, that's typical American, they're louder than us, they make no more noise than us. It never occurred to me that there was that kind of wrongful conviction going on. And as I say, just assumed, of course, the police wouldn't frame an innocent person. Why would they do it? Well, I found out the reason for that. Taking the risk to do it, but to them, it was just normal routine.
We can name the West Memphis Three, Tommy Ward, Adnan Syed, the exonerated five, Jeffrey Descovich, Marty Tancliffe. The list is endless. The list is endless. But for me, those came into view once I came across Brendan Dassey. The education I think that all of us have had over the past 5+ years has just been incredible. And I think one of the roles for all advocates is that we're engaging and educating not only each other, but the general public. And when you see people advocating on Twitter, for example, I can see the level of education in the tweets as they evolve from different people. So that these people are consuming as much information as they possibly can. The one question I do have in regards to the true crime genre, and this is a little bit of a side question, do you think there are ethical issues here? So do we walk a fine line between activism and morbidity? I'll throw that open.
Gee, that's a very interesting question.
I think you do, don't you, with that Murder in the Park documentary, where that David Protest went way, way too far with his students and managed to get Anthony Porter out of jail when, and our story Simon put in there, but that's, that is so against the norm, that is one example. I don't think I've ever come across another one, but when it comes to wrongful convictions, I don't think there's a danger of being too vociferous as an advocate.
Yeah.
From my point of view, Tracy, I'm always very conscious, and it's so easy to walk off the path of accepting the important principle of the presumption of innocence. So in the advocacy role, in the enthusiasm to get justice, we need to abide by the rules. And so whilst we'll all form views about certain things or even certain people, we need to do so in a very cautious way so as we don't commit the same sins that others have done in the case of Steven and Brendan, for example, that we're quite rightly critical of. But I think you can do that. You can do that effectively. You can do that with due respect to the principles that I refer to, and do it professionally and carefully and caringly, and at the same time still have debate of differences of opinion. So I think in the advocacy for justice issue, it doesn't give us an open book to be raving. It should give us an open book to be thoughtful. It should give us an open book to be enthusiastic, but at the same time, we need to abide by the principles of the presumption of innocence in particular. And I think when we do that, we're more effective and more powerful in the things we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, 100% agree.
I think for me, there is a fine line. I bristle sometimes when I read certain comments, when I realize people, because we are identified by a group of support as we're supporters. I don't agree with everything everyone says, and we're not a homogenous group. We're all individuals after the same cause. But with true crime, I do worry that there's this, this sensationalization of just watching and sort of voyeurism, if you would, on this sort of grotesque details of what being human is in some realms. With the wrongful conviction, it's a tough call for me to call it true crime, because wrongful conviction, it's just a different world for me, because I think one of the reasons it resonates, especially this making a murder, is wrongful conviction it's an injustice that's agreed upon most of the time. And so, and it resonates with people like, wow, that could have been me, but, and the thing for me with this particular case, Steven Avery, is it's happened to him twice. And so if anyone was talking, it gets lost that Teresa Halbach is part of the crime. To me, the true crime of this particular saga is the corruption, and so I think humans, we always have to walk a fine line, and really, like Mark says, you got to go back and sort of just ground yourself and see, what is my motivation here? Is it, that's a good question in life, is what is my motivation of why I'm doing this? And hopefully you come up with a good answer.
I mean, the work of an advocate is never linear, right? It can be chaotic. We know this, and it's absolutely true of this case. The stream of information is ever evolving, and the need to digest, respond, and share case movements, such as new petitions or new motions being filed to the supporter community, is vital in maintaining momentum. So, touching on what Mark said, do you think the presumption of innocence is sacred, and that by being a sharer of information in a very public way, that it's vital to not repeat Kratz and Kaczynski's behaviour in the court of public opinion? Or are you of the mindset that anyone is fair game, and that all information should be shared and presumption of innocence be damned? Is that tricky, do you think? Paul, I'll put that to you first.
Well, can I just go back a step, though, to the end of Making a Murderer, when Steve Glynn, who is obviously Steve's lawyer that eventually, along with the Wisconsin Innocence Project, they get Steve out back in 2003. And he poses the question, the common belief is that if you've got the right lawyers and they ask the right questions and they do the right things and they come before the right judges, then everything will be right. And he asked the question, at what point do people begin to realize it ain't working? So going back to this advocacy thing, and I know Stacey, you're keen on this, how do you sort of think outside the box, as it were? How do you come up with other ways of trying to draw awareness to the case, trying to make a difference here? You don't want to just go down the same path that everybody else has gone down before, and you end up with something as crass as Orlando Hudson in the Michael Peterson case, saying at the end of it, Michael Peterson imprisoned for however many years it was, at least a dozen, if I remember rightly, and he talks about the fact that it shows the system works, and you think, seriously, you think that the system works, that somebody was imprisoned all that time because of the decisions that you made in court to allow things to happen the way they did? I was shouting and swearing at the TV when he said that.
Obviously you're a sharer of information in a very public way. My question, I guess, is quite pertinent to you insofar as, do you think that presumption of innocence is sacred, or do you think anyone's fair game?
Certainly, if I'm touching on something would be deemed, possibly a bit risky, then I would always try and pose it as not being an opinion, but asking the question. But I suppose that kind of sidesteps what you're saying. In other words, is everything that you hear, should that then be shared? No, I don't think so. I think there has to be certain things that you have to act with a little bit of caution over. Just because you've heard something, it doesn't mean to say that it's true. So you've got to be careful how how you disseminate that information. One of the things that always struck me was that if you like the guilty community, they're trying to claim that the convictions of Steven and Brendan are perfectly sound. You say to yourself, who are you trying to kid? I would much rather you be honest with us and say, look, we're happy with the convictions because it saved the county, it saved the police, it saved a lot of money, a lot of reputations. Does it really matter if a guy from a scrapyard and his not very bright nephew have ended up where they are? If they said to me, does that really matter? At least they would be honest with me, that is their opinion. And of course, the answer to that, well, yeah, of course it matters. It doesn't matter whether they're Stephen Brendan or Mike Peterson, a celebrated author. It doesn't matter who they are. We're just going to keep talking until they're walking. But yes, to give you a sort of definitive answer, yes, there have been instances where people have got in touch and shared certain bits of information. I've even passed on that information to Kathleen Zellner and just left it at that. She's the one that can that can act on that. I remember once I emailed Steve Drizzen and shared him an email which he hadn't seen.
So, Mark, Stacey, do you have any thoughts on that?
Stacey, I'll let you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I think there is always, we have to discern, and you have to check yourself, because confirmation bias and all that stuff. I've always, with this particular case, I know my biases. I know what I thought. I try to circle back and make sure I've got the right take on it, and I think I do. But I certainly don't. In fact, I don't like, and I try not to practice, and I do not like reading when I hear kind of really frivolous or shallow accusations being thrown around whatever platform there is. It bristles me, because back to what Mark was saying, you have to think you're involved in this case or interested because of this presumption of innocence that was denied, both, well, Stephen especially. And so what's the difference between you and someone else if you're just slinging out accusations baseless on, just hearsay virtually? We can say we research stuff. There's very few of us that research. If you've read the case files, CASO, trial transcripts, you've done a little bit of research. If you're getting through evidence ledgers, you've done a bit more, but if you're just reading someone's view on Facebook, that's not real research. And so I bristle at a lot of the stuff I read. And so I think, we have to discern. You have to do due diligence.
Yes, the presumption of innocence, it's a principle that is sacred in my view, but it's how you handle it that is important. And I think it goes hand in glove with the noble pursuit of truth. So the presumption of innocence can't be to the exclusion of enthusiasm for the truth. And when I'm dealing with matters in this case, I look at not the presumption as being different, but how I deal with it differently if I'm dealing with commentary about individual citizens as distinct from commentary about taxpayer-funded law enforcement officers who have a duty to perform their role. So if there is commentary going on about individuals that is based on provable facts, well, then that's a matter of fact. If there's commentary going on about suppositions or speculation or just raw emotion, well, then I don't at all encourage that. Or if it's being said, always qualify it by saying this is not factually based, it's an assumption. But in my own personal discussion, I don't get involved in speculation about things when it comes to individual people, because I just think that's grossly unfair. And if all that was said in social media was true, there were about 20 people that was responsible for the murder of Teresa Halbach, if you just accepted that on its merit. If I could then return to the issue of law enforcement officials. Now, I distinguish these people away as in their role as a taxpayer-funded role and who they are as individuals. I'll just pick a name. If I take Tom Fassbender as an example, I don't know who he is as a man. I don't know who he is as a father, a husband, or a member of his community. And I don't need to know. What I do need to know that he's a paid law enforcement official that I have a right to expect would behave in a certain way. And so I think it's fair game that I couldn't be critical of him as an example, based on what we know happened, not on speculation. If I believe he behaved in what I see as an evil way towards Brendan Dassey, I think that's fair game. Does that make Tom Fassbender the worst man in the world? No, it doesn't. And I don't even try to go to that because I don't know him. But I do know that his paid behavior, his role, his duty to uphold truth and to pursue truth was his duty under the law. So to me, he's fair game, and anyone in a similar role like that, such as Mark Hoddinott and Ken Kratz and even the judges, right? I think they're fair game, provided you do so professionally and with due thought.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction that you've made there, because they are fair game in those moments where it matters to the wrongful conviction.
Yes.
Now, we've touched on the researchers, but this community is absolutely teeming with some of the most incredible researchers. I'll name but a few of them. So we've got Millbilly, Joris, Magilla, Mystic Jinx, AC Rookie, Dr. Silkman. Actually, as I say those names, it sounds a little bit like X-Men or Marvel characters, but all of whom are absolutely relentless in conducting an investigation into the minutiae of the case. An investigation that law enforcement didn't or wouldn't do in 2005, 2006. And we know that this level of commitment in the seeking of justice has not waned in over 5 years. Where would you direct new people to the case to inform themselves? So what are the most trusted sources of truth, do you think?
I think I'll start that. I think the case files, trial transcripts are the best place to go. And it takes a special person to go through that and find it. But other than that, until you arm yourself with some real detailed knowledge of CASO report, all that stuff, that's where I think you really get an understanding of what is going on. YouTube channels and stuff are great, but they seem to, I think Eric Jose's channel is actually great because he was, there's a lot of timing going on in this thing. So as you're going, we're 5 years into it, but 3 years into it, there was this sort of, it's like we were all together, this idealism coming along. Now it seems like there's a huge wave of new people that are emotionally charged, but not as knowledgeable. And so I think Eric Jose and Millbillies, but in order to understand, and Paul Capaldi's and those things, but in order to understand that, what they're talking about and the depth of some of the issues, you really need that background. So I always tell people, don't, just go to the CASA report, the trial transcripts, and Steven Avery, whatever, I forget the website, but any of those ones that offer that information.
Yeah, I would just agree. Sorry, Mark, I was just going to say I agree with everything that Stacey said. But going back to you mentioned about some of the really bad actors in this case, definitely the judges. And can you imagine if you had a mixture of Judge Willis and Fox in one? That would be absolutely horrendous, wouldn't it?
I don't think anyone deserves that.
I, again, would echo Stacey's sentiments about the deeper research, but it's always difficult to do that because your question related to new people. I would say that even though it's only a stepping stone towards the fuller knowledge, is to watch the documentary any number of times, because you'll learn more and more the more times you watch it. Take that foundation piece of knowledge, albeit without a lot of deep detail, but take that foundation piece of knowledge, bring it into the chat environment to kind of embellish and add to that knowledge. But at that point, you need to have your filters on high alert, because there is so much information that goes on in the chat environments that is well intended, but are just emotional outbursts. And you need to have a capacity to to get rid of that.
Mm.
And then the question is, well, how do you do that? Where do we go to from there? And then you get involved in that deeper research. And if you're really enthusiastic about it, maybe join some of those researchers who are all very engaging and want to have other people involved and assist that with that. But this is a challenge of the mind as well as a challenge of anything else. And so your capacity to analyze something, push us to the side, the garbage, absorb the possibility and move forward is really the main game in being in this research and advocacy role.
I was just going to add to my answer is, if there's new people out there and they're thinking, you find that one thing that really bugs you. There'll be a lot, but just find one of the main ones, and you try and inform yourself about that. And the one thing I would say from my experience is you pace yourself, because this case, we always talk about the rabbit holes, and they're deep, and they can take it's literally taken, it's taken hours and thousands of hours of my life. And, I enjoy it. And because I think I know what the truth is, or like, I know that my motivation is to expose the corruption that to me is blatant, but it can take a lot of energy, and so just find one piece. And if people are new and they just say the key is what gets them, or the blood is what gets them, or whatever it is, I swear, if they just research that one small point, they're gonna be here for a while too, because it just snowballs on you.
Going back to what Stacey was saying there about the fact that you watch the documentary and then you go and check out the trial transcript, because the actual documentary, I think there were 3 episodes that dealt with the actual trial, so that's like 3 hours worth. But if you go through the trial transcripts, you're talking about, 28 days worth of trials, and interesting things like, why were there no photographs taken? So you can actually go in and read the trial transcripts, and you actually get to the point where Tom Sturdivant in the trial says, I accept responsibility for that. And it was just a case of, I was determined to find out how was this all handled during the trial. So you just keep out those trial documents, as you say there. Stacey was saying that's one of the best things that you can do. Some of the researchers out there that have posted stuff on Twitter, you mentioned your McGillas and your Joyce's, TikTok Manitowoc himself, it's great because I keep getting a message, there's a new tweet and you go and check it out. And, it's presenting stuff from angles that you've never even thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming to the end, and it would be remiss of me not to mention Richard McAdam in an episode of the 6th Hour focus on advocacy. Many may know him as Eric Osey, and sadly passed away last year. Mark, when we talk of being activists, there's also a responsibility to encourage and mentor others. Can you tell listeners about the Richard McAdam Advocacy Foundation and the legacy that it's creating? Yes,
thank you, Tracy. And I might just say, to preface that, is that Richard was just truly inspiring, and it probably, if not for him in some ways, I may not be where I am today in this case in advocacy pursuits. And in fact, Paul has been recently playing some of Richard's past broadcasts, which I said to Paul the other day, reminded me more powerfully in his absence how powerful in fact he was. And so to go in honor of his achievement, significant achievement, and together with family earlier this year, but the thought was constructed from last year, we created the Richard McAdam Advocacy Foundation as a tribute to Richard. The purpose for which this advocacy foundation was to encourage new voices to speak out about matters that were important to them in a professional, caring and classy way. And that foundation started in January, February of this year. And it actually takes the construction of a financial contribution to providing broadcasting equipment, screens and cameras and microphones and lighting. And attached to that is mentoring services to encourage and help people in whatever area of broadcasting they might need some assistance in, which we all do. So we thought that was an appropriate way, given what Richard brought to us, that we would continue that legacy by encouraging others to speak out. And it's early days. We've received a lot of support. We'll be shortly issuing our first scholarship in that, which we'll be talking about more in the weeks ahead.
Oh, fantastic. That's brilliant. And as you said, a fit-in legacy in Richard's name. Now, as time's gone on and you reflect back on perhaps who you were, late 2015, I know certainly that my life has been changed by my involvement in this case. What has changed for you?
So I'll answer that first, if I may. I think what's changed for me is I've discovered another part of me that probably was always there, but really didn't have a light to shine on. And the amount of time, as with Paul and Stacey and yourself, that I spend on this matter with Steven and Brendan astounds me. But it astounds me because it feels so natural to be so passionate about this cause. And I feel, in fact, in a very tragic way in terms of the impact it's had on Steven and Brendan and their families. I feel honoured that I've actually found a pathway here, because it's taught me a lot about me and a lot about society and a lot about how powerful we are as a collective. And we don't always have to agree to be powerful. The coming together and the importance of good principles in life is really expounded exponentially in this case. And so I'm grateful, even though I'm not a young guy, I'm in my 60s, that there was so much to learn and continued to be learned from this case. And that's the difference it's made to me.
Yeah, I think, how have I changed? So many ways, to be honest. With regards to the case having an impact on my being is, what happened was I gained a faith in humanity through just regular people stepping up, and everyone has for whatever reason, this cause chose me. But I'd never been involved in anything where I saw so many just quote unquote run of the mill people, actually standing up. And back to Richard, he was a real big part of that, because I thought, he had talked, and I remember one video he put out, and he said he was just talking about how he just decided, if he wasn't going to do it, then, or if he didn't, who would? And so that's how it's really opened my eyes to when we stand up, we inspire other people, no matter how small or how big. You can look at these Kathleen Zellners and these like mega stars, that how they inspire tons of people. But on a day-to-day basis, standing up for anything and speaking your truth, it sparks people, and that's what ignites that inferno. And that's why this case is such a big thing. So that's really what's it's instilled in me, the sort of faith in humanity, the goodness, because so often in today's media, it's all negative about, but we still have this core value, and it's healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that my wife, been married now 28 years, she knows me very well. She knows that if I get a bee in my bonnet about something, I don't let it go. That's just me. Once I decide that I'm interested in something, then, I'm all in there, and it's not one of these things that you can do half-heartedly, as far as I'm concerned. You have to give it plenty of attention, and it's not like it's like hard work doing a YouTube channel. And it's great fun doing a YouTube channel, because as Stacey's pointed out, and Mark, you meet some great people, some really great people that, they don't have to be the biggest names in the world. It's just, regular people that have come together. But the one thing that has changed, of course, is that, I know so much now about the legal system, and I refuse to call it a justice system in America. Well, certainly not in Wisconsin, but I do know a lot more now about the legal system. And I'm glad that I've found out all this sort of information, as you know, and following what Kathleen Zellner's doing, and following what Steve Drizzen and Laura Nyrider went through, all the hurdles that they jumped. They kept getting hurdles put in their way. They kept jumping them and jumping them and jumping them until eventually Supreme Court. Well, I think I've already told you what my thoughts about them refusing to take on Brendan's case, because I remember chatting with the dude about the fact that, what are we going to do this year? Are we going to go to Manitowoc, or are we going to go to Washington to the Supreme Court to hear Brendan's case? And it doesn't happen, Getting back to the dude, though, yeah, he was often used to refer to him as my wee brother, which was quite comical, because he's like, I'm 5'9" and he's well over 6 foot tall, but he was my wee brother. Mark's definitely the older brother. He's the one that's in charge. And me and Stacey are the. We're a bit sort of. We've got a little bit of militancy about us, haven't we?
Yeah, I think though, listening to yourselves and many of the people in the community that I've spoken with in the past, that tenacity is a commonality.
Yeah.
In people involved in being active in this case. Finally, gentlemen, what words, as this is the 6th hour, the wrongful conviction of Brendan Dassey, would you leave for those who are supporting Brendan in his fight for justice?
From me, Tracy, the simple words and very common words is never give up. Brendan Dassey could be our own sons, and if you take on that ownership of his cause, you'll see it through. And the same is true of Steven, but for Brendan, just never give up, never give up. The truth will prevail. He will go home. I'm absolutely certain of that.
I would say that Martin Luther King Jr.'s injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That's really what fueled me. And so that's why even though I have no connection to Brendan or any of these people, that's why I think that's what's fueled me. And so that goes towards Brendan and Steven or anything, and so that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, as I say, from having first watched the documentary after about a year, not having much sympathy for Brendan. Now I do have great sympathy for him, because I've had the pleasure of chatting at great length with Pete Dassey, his dad. And I think Brendan and Pete are very, very similar. Pete often says, I wasn't great at school, but, he's just a really nice person. I mean, as far as Brendan getting out, of course he is. He's as soon as Steven Avery gets released, he's going to be Steven Drizzen and Laura Nyrider. They're going to be knocking on the door, and they're going to be getting Brendan out pretty sharpish after Steve. Having come this far, it's not really about us being advocacy warriors. It's about Kathleen Zellner. She's really got the state running scared now, because and so they should be. She has really bust this case right open. She just keeps developing more and more, to use the term coined by the dude, wonkiness in this case, disingenuosity by the state. There's no doubt in my mind and the rest of us here that Stephen Brendan will soon be walking out of those prison gates.
Yeah, and hopefully Australia's lifted the ban on international travel by then.
Mark's desperate.
Oh my God,
yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. So thank you, Paul, Mark, Stacey. Thank you for all you do. And to play us out is one of Stacey's finest and just quietly my favourite, As Justice Slowly Disappears.
Thank you, Tracy.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tracy.
Oh, Steven Avery, Brendan Dassey, the case will bring you to tears. I want to dive in, you can go deep, it becomes painfully clear how the state pled the case on the press conference day for all to hear. convicting two innocent men on evidence that now disappears. We got lawyers talking, we got lawyers touring, they're traveling miles and miles. We got viewers viewing, we got people scouring, poring over case files. We got a lawyer tweeting, we got judges cheating, playing smoke and mirrors. All the while, two innocent men's lives, they slowly disappear. For me, forget everything, well, that the state has told. You got to understand, this case goes well beyond Avery Road. Oh, if you ever see the signs of tyranny, either far or near, if you turn away, it's your own